Hi guys, gals, and non-binary pals. My name is Coco. Normally you see me streaming over on Twitch at NeoCocoTv, but today I thought I would do a more personal one-on-one video for everybody. So a little known fact about me is last year I read over 30 books, and this year I have a goal of reading more than 50 books. I'm hoping I can hit 50 books. And well, I don't have a whole lot of places I can yap about them at. And so I figured I could do like a monthly book report. And I know VTubing and book reviews aren't really a thing that go together. That's what I'm going to be doing. If this is your vibe, all cool. If you want to just hear me yap about books, you don't quite have to watch the video. You can just hear me yap. However, I did some pretty fun little things for this, so I hope you guys do stick around. And also, if you want to get into reading books more and some of these books sound interesting to you, I would pick them up, check them out. I read all sorts of books. I like to read nonfiction. I like to read fantasy books. I like to read classics. I'm starting to get more into the contemporary field. And if you have any books that you want me to read, or maybe you're not quite sure if you want to pick up a book and you want somebody to review it for you, but nobody has yet, you can shoot me a message and I'll take the time and read it for you and tell you what I think. This month, I read 5 books. I read A Soul to Keep by Opal Rain, Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross, The Odyssey, Emily Wilson's translation more specifically, The Well of Ascension, the second Mistborn book by Brandon Sanderson, and The Book of X by Sarah Rose Etter. I really like all of these books, so there's nothing going to be really too negative for most of these books that I read this month, but I'm going to give a quick disclaimer. This is all, of course, opinion-based. Don't take some of the things I say too seriously. I'm not a professional book reviewer. I'm just somebody who listens to audiobooks while I'm at work and somebody who reads books right before I go to bed. So while some of my book opinions might be different than yours depending on the book, that's completely fine because books are subjective. Books are meant to be interpreted by the reader. I understand that maybe my opinions might be different than yours, and that's completely okay. Also, I wanted to add some of my reviews might contain spoilers. I didn't really make a huge script for this. I just figured I would yap about the books when I'm talking about them, and if some of it gets a little spoilery, sorry now, that's gonna be my apology now. I will try to put timestamps of when I talk about each book, so if you don't want me to spoil a book, you can skip to the next book and that'll work. Or if you're like me, I don't really care about spoilers. Sometimes spoilers makes me actually want to read the book. I will add trigger warnings for books as well. I am really excited to talk about these books with you guys because these are 5 books. Like I said, I really enjoyed them this year. Girl, it's been a month. I'm also kind of planning to do more short form reviews on TikTok for whenever I finish a book. And then at the end of the month, do another recap video of all the books I read. I thoroughly enjoyed all these books. I really did. So I'm going to start with the first book. The first book I read this year was A Soul to Keep by Opal Rain. It's the first book of the Duskwalker Bride series. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's a monster fucker book. I'm gonna tell you this now, not every single book on this list is a monster fucker book. This was the first book I read this year, however. I will say, outside of the book, the overall arcing plot of the book, the goal of the book, I really enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie. I thought I was gonna go in it and just be like, I don't really care what Rhea does or like what Orpheus does. I'm just here for the freaky action. Oh god. Don't watch this if you're my family, please. Either way, I really enjoyed the plot. I didn't really go into the books thinking I would. I really liked the character development. I really liked how Rhea was kind of like, man, I'm just kind of here for the vibes. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was kind of a nice change for a female MC of a romance novel, especially a fantasy romance novel, where she did have kind of the stereotypical of, ew, I don't want anything to do with you. However, she did eventually come around a lot quicker than I would imagine most other fantasy romance books are, because there's some out there, I'm not naming names, where they'll have like this enemies to lovers scenario, and then they get to the lovers and it's still like they're still enemies for some reason, and I'm like, bro, just kiss. However, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the romance aspect of it. I enjoyed like even the more domestic romantic moments that they had in the book. Like if you're into some monster then you might as well check it out. It was pretty good. Anyways, again, I promise the other books are not monster fucker books. God, I did it right. Soul to Keep. 4 out of 5 monster books. It was pretty good. The second book I read this year was Ruthless Vows, the second book of the Letter of Enchantment series by Rebecca Ross. This book had me on the floor. I'm not kidding you. I adored this book so much. So the first book is Divine Rivals. I don't know if you've seen it all over Book Talk. I've kind of learned not to trust Book Talk on a lot of book recommendations. However, 100% pick up the series. 100% quick trigger warnings. This does take place during a wartime. So if you're uncomfortable if you don't want to read a book about war, especially with current world affairs, I completely understand. This is the second book, like I said, of the Divine Rivals, and this is more of where they have an established relationship. I can't really give too much away for this book unless you've read Divine Rivals. However, there's this part in the book, and this is the only part I'm going to really get in depth with. So spoilers start here, by the way. If you don't want spoilers, ignore this. Listen, besties, if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. There's like this part where you know how they're on separate sides and they have to have that little meeting in the cafe. And there's this part where he's like, and because he was an utter fool for her, he like nudged her foot under the table. And I don't know why that line in particular just sticks with me so hard. I'm like, you are a fool, but I love you. I'm gonna say this, I really thoroughly enjoy the exploration of Iris's brother's PTSD, as well as like, I love kind of that Roman was more aware of what was around him earlier on, instead of like the amnesia trope taking on too long within the book. I thoroughly think Rebecca Ross's writing within these two books, Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows, I think it's phenomenal. If you have not read this book and you sat through me kind of giving a little bit of spoilers, please pick it up. Please, please, please. I'm begging you, I'm on my knees. I loved this series. I really did. This is gonna get the third book I read this month, The Odyssey by Homer. More specifically, the Emily Wilson translation. I'm gonna have to give a lot of trigger warnings because it is the Odyssey. It is a Grecian epic. And while Emily Wilson does a wonderful job at the translation, she does a far too good of a job. She's a little too straightforward with what the translation is. So I'm gonna give a lot of wordings on this one. So, wordings for the Odyssey, if you don't know. Sexual assault, mistreatment of women, pathetic man. I don't know how much of the Odyssey I can really trigger word. If it's a lot, there's a lot within it. If you want to read a book about a pathetic man, oh my god, please read the Odyssey. I also think it's heavily important to read older books and try and connect them to modern day events. That is something that you might see me do a lot as I go on with doing a series like this. I fully think it's important to keep reading older series and keep reading older books, even if they're boring. These are the words of our ancestors. These are the words of thousands of years ago, and some of them are still relevant today. Well, I know I went on that big long tangent on the Odyssey. There are some things about it that piss me the fuck off, but my god, am I a sucker for Grecian poems, or am I a sucker for just ancient poems in general? One of my favorite stories of all time, and one day maybe I'll do a rant video over it, is I adore the Epic of Gilgamesh. unironically, I thoroughly think everybody should read the Epic of Gilgamesh at least once in their life. However, with the Odyssey, there is a lot of... I feel like I could also do a whole yap video about the Odyssey. There's a lot of like contradictory statements throughout the story. Odysseus is able to go out and travel. In fact, he beds 3 different women during this travel, and then countless others during the actual Trojan War that we don't read about unless you read the Iliad. And within these books, and then you go back to his wife, Penelope, prudent Penelope, where she is staying. She is loyal. And they're like, that's what a wife's supposed to be like. A wife is supposed to wait for her man, even though he might be dead and sleeping with cool different goddesses. Like, I know when he was with Calypso, that man was fucking crying his eyes out, but he was still there for like, what, 3 years? I can go on about the Odyssey. I really can. I think Odysseus is a wonderful character to explain grief as well, however, because as the story progresses, at the very beginning of his journey back from Troy, he is confident. He is so excited to start telling people like all his great war stories. The first thing he does is fuck up a Cyclops, even though he's Athena's chosen. This is probably going to be the longest part of the video because I can yap about the Odyssey for hours. I can yap about Grecian mythology for hours. So I am I am so sorry in advance. So the thing is that you have to take into a lot of perspective when it comes to the Odyssey is you have to understand Poseidon's rivalry with Athena. Even prior to the Odyssey, even prior to the Trojan War, there is so much rivalry between the two that when you look at how Odysseus, who is Athena's chosen hero, is trying to travel back to Ithaca, he's trying to travel back through the fucking sea. And look, the most petty characters in the entire story are Athena and Poseidon. Nobody else gives a shit throughout the story. Nobody else. There are parts where Hermes is like, yo, dude, please just get the fuck home, bro. He can't because he just keeps pissing off Poseidon. And Athena does shit that pisses off Poseidon. She goes to her daddy and spews to her daddy. And look, there's even more rivalry between Zeus and Poseidon. Expecting this one man who already went through 10 years of war to have to put up with another 10 years of bullshit on the ocean because the gods can't just leave each other alone is fucking funny as shit. I'm not gonna lie. And while Odysseus is kind of a dickhead, he's a huge dickhead through the story. He talks down to his crew. He talks down to the fucking Cyclops. He talks down to the gods. Like, honestly, too, with the Cyclops, bro didn't have to spew shit. I'm gonna be so fucking for real, bro. Why did he do that? I don't care what poetic reason that he had to protect his crew from getting eaten by the Cyclops. Man, he talked too much shit, and that's why. And then he pulled the whole nobody thing out. He stabbed the Cyclops in the eye, and the Cyclops is like, oh, nobody stabbed my eye. Like, bro, why'd you admit that it was you? Because then he went and told his daddy on you, and his daddy's already pissed at you. Like I said, I can genuinely ramble about the Odyssey for so long. Don't even get me started on Circe. Circe's a whole nother can of worms to open up. Like, bestie. I also read Circe already. What's her name? I'm gonna put the book right here. I can't think of the author. I read this book last year. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Weird ass ending. That's all I'm gonna put on it. I'm not gonna go into a full depth video reviewing Circe. Odyssey is 4 pigs out of 5. And if you've... Oh, I didn't even get on like my tangent about the suitors, bro. If you want me to go on a rampage about Grecian mythology at any point, I will gladly do it. Just give me the word. I'll go fucking sicko mode. Don't even get me started. The 4th book I read this year was A Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. It is the 2nd book of the Mistborn series. I wanted to re-record this part because I realized that it didn't really talk about a lot of the key factors of the Mistborn series, and I really wanted to touch base on it. The Mistborn series is about a world where the Lord Ruler, who is the main antagonist of the series, I'm say, hey, this is where the spoilers are going to start, so if you don't want spoilers, please skip to the next book. So the Lord Ruler is, despite primarily only being a main antagonist of the first book, he is still definitely an antagonist of the second book as well, despite his death. There is still lingering effects of the Lord Ruler, like a society where the collapse of the government and the belief system that was there prior is now starting to be unraveled. I think that's a very interesting plot point, seeing how the prior book for Mistborn, it is mainly about the world being under this rule, being under this strict authoritarian government, where the Lord Ruler in Luthadel is seen kind of as this holy figure almost, the man who took the darkness away. However, there is still an immense amount of disparity. Also, hey, heads up, if you hear any barking behind me, it is because between now, the last book I talked about, I got a dog. He is currently 9 p.m. however, and I am treating him like I treat my real life son. There is a bedtime. All the animals in my house know there's a bedtime. They all go to bed at the same time. If anybody's ever had a puppy, I'm sure y'all are aware how kennel training is. One of the biggest foundations of this book series, as far as I've gotten, is that the freedom of faith and the freedom of belief system is a human factor of everything. And to dismantle faiths and groups of people to hide the past. Also, I have my baby monitor with me. So if you also hear a little baby talking, it's because he's also supposed to be in bed, and he's chit-chatting in his room instead. Not having the freedom to be a human with your beliefs and your ancestry as well as your culture is pretty much a human quality and a human factor that not a lot of people really think about. I think especially in modern times today, it's more prevalent than ever that we understand this, and to read a book like the Mistborn series, where it was written a couple years ago and the meaning of it behind it is still very much true. We cannot have humanity, we cannot have culture without different cultures around us is incredibly prevalent. So culture is something that I find incredibly important to the human experience, and without it, humans would be nothing more than just a normal another animal. And I think that's also a very huge theme of the Mistborn trilogy, despite obviously the revolution, is because Saysen, I think I'm saying his name right, his whole character is talking about different religions and explaining he'll meet somebody and he'll give them a religion that he finds fitting for them. And there's multiple times where somebody will turn around and be like, why does that matter? And he's like, religion is something that drives everybody. I think even now today, religion is such a hard topic to talk about because we don't understand the human factor of it. And we don't understand that religion is culture. And while I might not be religious, somebody next to you might be, and they might be of different faith. That doesn't mean that I should treat them any less, or they should treat me any less, because we are both human and we are both exploring the world in our own way. And I think that's a very important factor of the books. Now, for the more human elements of it, where it is, I don't think I should say human elements, but more of the character elements, I guess I should say, with Finn, how she is a teenage girl experiencing the world. She was raised more within the realm of the lower class, where she didn't really have quite everything she could need. She was living on the streets, living with different gangs. It is very prevalent that her life was full of hardship. And for her, in the first book specifically, to go from this lifestyle of having to not know where her next meal is coming from to basically being the forefront of a revolution, and then seeing that essential figure of Kelsier being killed, being martyred, to upfront this revolution and really kickstart that revolution, to being in the second book where even though she was more of a setback of the revolution, she was a figure of the revolution but not the forefront. Now she is the forefront because she is seen as being the strongest Mistborn. I will backtrack a little bit. I will say the magic system in it, fucking sick. I'm looking at this little graph of all the different metals and what they do. That's kind of sick. I really like that they use metals as like the magic elements rather than like hocus pocus, or they can feel it within them. However, for Vin, because she was trained under Kelsier, who was considered one of the strongest Allomancers of his time and becoming the strongest Mistborn of her time, she goes from kind of a sideline character revolutionary to again the forefront and being seen as the weapon. And there's multiple times within the Wells of Ascension where Ellen Venture, who is kind of like seen as like the romance figure of the previous book, he's really into philosophy, he's really into politics, he'd probably be really into like some wild ass podcast. Rest in peace, Ellen Venture. You would have loved podcast. Going from Ellen becoming the king after Lord Ruler's death in the second book, you could see the dynamic between them very much shift, where they both really care about each other. There's this multiple times where Ellen says, I don't need to be stronger because you're here to protect. And then he goes on to say stuff like, oh, I don't understand Vin. I'm not quite sure how to talk to Vin. And like as the book continues, they slowly understand their differences and get back to understanding that each other are different and that's why they love each other. But at the same time, understanding that each of their weaknesses should be their strong points together as a couple. And I think that's a really cool dynamic for a fantasy novel couple, especially seeing how a lot of the time fantasy novels will usually entail if the woman is strong, the man's kind of useless and kind of a dickhead. And Ellen can be kind of a dickhead, but he's just kind of a naive dickhead rather than an intentional one. But I genuinely think the Mistborn series has been a really entertaining book series to read right now, especially with the current events of the world. And I don't think we should read books and not see dynamics of the real world around us and not understand the similarities. And I'm gonna say that completely honest and with my heart. If you read a book and you're like, this sounds like current affairs, oh well, you're kind of missing the point. I'm sorry. I know I said it previously, books are subjective and whatever, but if you read a political book about a revolution and you tell me there's nothing we can look at for modern times and modern philosophy in it, then I'm sorry, we can't have a conversation together. We are two different people. But again, I would highly, highly recommend reading the Mistborn trilogy. There are like more fucking books to it. I have one more book to read, just the Hero of Ages for the main trilogy, and then there's like another trilogy of like in the fucking future, which is crazy. But yeah, I'm gonna rate the Final Empire for 4 out of 5 copper. I highly recommend it. And the 5th and final book I read this year, or this month, was The Book of X by Sarah Rose Etter. The Book of X is kind of one of those books where you're either gonna get it or you're not gonna get it. It's a bit of a hard read. I'm not gonna lie. It's not hard as in like, ooh, the writing's bad. It's hard as in it really made me think about a lot of my life, and it made me reflect a lot on myself, which already is incredible to me. I love that in a book. I genuinely love that in a book. If I have to put a book down because it's making me feel too many things, that's good writing. I'm sorry. So The Book of X, I will say, again, is a little bit of a weird one, so stick with me. It's a story about a girl named Cassie who is born with a knot in her stomach. And her mom was born with a knot in her stomach, and her grandma was born with a knot in their stomach. None of the other women in the world have a knot in their stomach, but it is kind of used as a tool to make her different and be seen as kind of like something that brings bullying upon Cassie. That's terrible wording, but I'm gonna stick with it. And again, it has, so like the Book of X, there's a lot of writing in it that's like pretty mundane, pretty normal stuff. Like the first part of the book is her childhood to teenage years, and there's parts where she has a crush on a boy, and even though she's a little weird, like he makes fun of her, and there's like a line in it where she will intentionally stand in front of him in the hallway just so he could brush past her. And like, I'm sorry, if that's the type of shit we did in school, you were just like so excited to even be in the same room as our crush. And then there's moments where like her father, his job, he works as a meat miner. He mines meat out of the earth and he sells meat from the earth. And her brother goes to the meat mines and digs out the meat. I think a lot of the moments where it's more of the weird writing, we can kind of narrate it in a way of understand that they're kind of allegories and aren't completely meant to be taken seriously, especially like the knot in the meat mine. And then later on, the second part of the book is her coming of age, becoming an adult, living in a bigger city. It is only ever described as the bigger city And whenever she gets a job, she works for the man. She types for the man at her job. And that's how it's described. It's meant to be vague. It's meant to be like something you can give in for yourself. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about this book series, is it was stuff while I couldn't relate to everything Cassie was going through, I could put things in there. Yeah, I completely understand where she's going, because the knot to me could be insecurities. Or the knot to me could be something traumatic that happened in my life that changed my life. Or the knot to you could be something completely different. And the meat mine, for example, to me, the meat mine just means like, I don't know what the fuck my dad does for work. I know what he does, but like not really, you know? And so that's kind of where I like took it as, and especially since her dad's considered like the award winner, the breadwinner of the house. And like her mom, sorry, I'm itching my eyes. If my model is doing weird shit, it's because of that. And her mom is like really obsessed with fashion books. And while there's times where her mom is sweet and loving, there's moments where she turns a little harsh and becomes obsessed with beauty, and thus making Cassie fall under these like beauty standards that her mom's obsessed with. I think that's a really interesting dynamic as well, and especially when she gets older, where there's moments of her dating life, for example. So she's constantly like bringing guys home. They notice the knot and they'd say, I can't do this, and there's a line about how the same symphony happens again. Footsteps receding, the door closing, the car starting, and the car driving away. And I think that's very interesting. I also think like how she describes the men from the bar. They're always the man from the bar. They're nothing else. So again, this book has really vague continuity in it, and I think that's really interesting because again, it's something you can end up relating to yourself while also having moments of reality to it as well. Again, I'm gonna say this for sure, it is definitely a book for the weird girls. If it's something that you're not quite sure on, it's not a very long book at all. It was only a 4-hour audiobook. Pretty sure the physical book is only a couple pages long as well. So if it's something you're interested in, mind you, again, it is something that's gonna make you think. It is something that is gonna like give you a lot to really think about. And if that's something you're looking for in a book, pick it up, because I love weird books. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give the Book of X 4X out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I wish it was longer, don't get me wrong. With that being said, that is the end of the video. If there is anything that you guys would like to talk about for any of the books I talked about in this video, go ahead and share with me in the comments. If there's any books that you want me to read, let me know, and I will go ahead and put them on my TBR. If this is also another type of video series you would like to see, let me know, because at the time of this recording, I did finish my first book for February. And so I'm probably going to record a little bit of me talking about that book. I didn't really like it, spoiler alert, but that'll be for the next discussion if we want to talk about it. So yeah, with that being said, I do have a Twitter. I have a Discord server if you guys would like to go in there. We talk about books, we talk about gaming, and I also stream on Twitch sometimes whenever I feel like it, whenever I remember. So if you would like to see me or hang out or talk anywhere, go ahead and hit me up any of those places. And with that, I will see you guys next time. Bye.